In this video, we'll explain how to correctly fill out the Excel template. We will use 3 factories inspired from the Woods supply chain as examples. Factory A, Factory B, and Factory C. The Excel file contains 3 sheets: General Step Description, Factory's Example Info, and Factory's Example Diagram. The first sheet, General Step Description, gives detailed information for each step. This information, presented in the form of questions, can help you formulate questions for the factory manager. It is meant to help you correctly fill out the other 2 sheets. Important: you should not write anything in the General Step Description sheet. This sheet is only for guidance and must remain empty. All information must be entered in the second and third sheets, Factory's Example Info and Factory's Example Diagram. Although the first sheet is important, our main focus will be on the Factory's Example Info and Factory's Example Diagram. These are the sheets where most of the work will be done. Let's begin with the Factory's Example Diagram sheet. In this sheet, you will find 5 different types of shapes. Each shape symbolizes a specific element in the system. The circle shape represents a buffer or warehouse of a material. Circles come in 4 different colors, each with a different meaning. Green circles represent materials that the factory sells to the market. This includes intermediate components, if they are also available to other factories. Red circles represent waste materials. These are discarded and not available to the market. Dark blue circles are internal buffers of the factory. They represent stored materials that do not fall into the other categories. Light blue circles represent scrap materials that can be reused within the factory. We also use special logic symbols to clarify complex relationships in the diagram. The AND symbol is used when a process requires a combination of materials, for example A and B and C, as input to produce an output. Place the AND symbol near the processes and draw arrows from the shared buffer to each process. If multiple processes have the same outputs, you can use the AND symbol again to show this. The OR symbol is used when a buffer can be supplied either by one process or another, for example A or B or C. Next, we have the rectangle shape, which represents a process in the factory. The left side of the rectangle shows input materials and the right side shows output materials. Rectangle, process, and circle, buffer shapes alternate in the diagram. This is because every process must take input only from buffers, and its outputs must also be buffers. We also use the triangle symbol next to the list of suppliers. Triangles are used for buffers that come from outside the factory, from suppliers. The supplier list must include all suppliers that can provide the same material. If 2 suppliers provide different materials, then you must create 2 separate buffers and 2 separate supplier lists. But if 2 suppliers offer the same material, for example electricity, then you create 1 buffer with 1 supplier list. Arrows in the diagram always move from left to right and have one direction. In some cases, you can use a 2-direction arrow between 2 buffers. This is useful when the same buffer appears in 2 different parts of the factory. For example, if 2 processes, one at the beginning and one at the end, produce the same waste, you can handle this in 2 ways. Option 1. Create 1 red buffer with arrows from both processes, if the layout remains clear. Option 2. Create 2 identical red buffers with the same name, and connect them with a 2-direction arrow. You can choose between these 2 options, depending on which one makes the diagram more clear and understandable. Now let's move on to the Factory's Example Info sheet. This sheet is organised into 7 steps, laid out in columns from left to right. Step 1 is where we fill in the factory's name, latitude, longitude and type. This helps us categorize the factory correctly within the supply chain. Step 2 is where we describe the products or materials that the factory offers to the market. In simple terms, these are the green-coloured buffers from the diagram. Each product has fields such as Ref ID, which links to an LCA UUID if available, the process that produces it, its quantity in the warehouse, and unit of measurement. There is also a supplier list field, although it might be empty at this stage since these are outgoing products. Other fields help describe the product in detail, so the digital twin system can match it with potential buyers. Step 3 is where we describe the processes that produce the products listed in Step 2. Here, you write the input materials needed by the process, along with their quantities that the process need and units. Based on those inputs, you then fill in the outputs, product, scrap, waste, or other, with quantity that the process produce and units. In the duration cell, note how long the process takes. The triggering field describes how the process is activated. For example, manually, on demand, every hour, etc. In the details section, add any emissions and additional information. Step 4 is for describing any inputs or outputs from the Step 3 processes that have not been described yet. You don't need to describe again the products already covered in Step 2. Instead, focus on materials like intermediate components, dark blue, scrap materials, light blue, and other internal buffers. Fields here include from process list, if this material is an output of another process from the same factory. You also include the quantity in the warehouse, unit and supplier list if it comes from outside the factory. Waste materials, red buffers, are described in a separate section just below the grey divider in this column. There you list the processes that produce the specific waste, its quantity in warehouse, units, and whether it can be reused. If any input or output comes from another internal process and has not yet been described, we use Step 5. Step 5 combines logic from both Step 3 and Step 4. First, describe the process whose output appeared in Step 4. Then, describe its inputs and outputs, but only if they haven't already been described. If any material again comes from another internal process, you repeat this process until everything is fully described. Any waste not yet described is again added after the grey divider in Inputs-Outputs column. Step 6 is for describing the suppliers and the products they offer. This helps us categorise them and detect common suppliers across the supply chain. It also helps optimise material flow and supplier selection. Finally, Step 7 includes a few additional questions related to logistics and transport operations. Thank you for your attention.